I'm Katie Wilson and you're watching A News. Now, let's take a look at today's top stories. Trump says President Maduro has been captured, facing a range of charges in New York. Strikes on residential buildings in Kharkiv injure 31 people. Iran's Foreign Affairs Minister Abbas Araghchi says the army is on standby. Thanks for joining us. President Trump says American forces have carried out a large-scale strike on Venezuela and captured the country's long-serving leader, Nicolas Maduro. The White House accuses Maduro of drug trafficking and election fraud, allegations he has repeatedly denied. Here's the latest on this developing story.
US President Donald Trump says American forces have captured Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, following what he described as a large-scale US strike on Venezuela. In a post on his Truth Social platform, Trump said Maduro and his wife had been detained and flown out of the country, calling the operation a success. The United States had accused Maduro of running a so-called narco state and rigging last year's election, claims he has repeatedly denied, accusing Washington of seeking control over Venezuela's oil reserves. Venezuela's government said both civilians and military personnel were killed in the strikes, but did not provide casualty figures. Trump said the operation was carried out in coordination with US law enforcement. A US official told Reuters that Maduro was captured by elite special forces, while Republican Senator Mike Lee said Secretary of State Marco Rubio told him Maduro would face criminal charges in the United States. Venezuela's Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who could assume leadership, said she had no information on Maduro's whereabouts and demanded proof that he is alive.
In the face of this brutal situation, and in the face of this brutal attack, we have no knowledge of the whereabouts of the President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Celia Flores. We demand from the Donald Trump government immediate proof of life for President Maduro and the First Lady.
The operation marks the most direct US military intervention in Latin America since the 1989 invasion of Panama, when former leader Manuel Noriega was captured and later imprisoned in the United States.
Now, we are expecting a press conference from Trump in the coming minutes on this story, and of course we'll bring that to you as it comes. But for now, US military actions against Venezuela have sparked international condemnation. Colombia, Brazil and Cuba have denounced the strikes, emphasising the need for dialogue. Several countries and organisations have criticised the US moves as violations of international law.
Colombian President Gustavo Petro has strongly condemned the US airstrikes on Venezuela and immediately called for an urgent meeting of the United Nations and the Organization of American States. Petro wrote on his official X account, "Caracas is being bombed right now," adding that the attacks are being carried out with missiles. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva described the operation as a violation of international law and a disregard for Venezuela's sovereignty. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel called the action a criminal attack and urged the international community to respond immediately. Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs criticized the operations as a breach of Article 2 of the UN Charter and a threat to regional peace. CARICOM, Latin American countries and other leaders, including the Ecuadorian President Gabriel Noboa, condemned the US operation and called for dialogue. The Cuban government also strongly condemned the US military actions and reaffirmed their support for Venezuela and its population. The Spanish government called for de-escalation and compliance with the principles of international law, while British Prime Minister Keir Starmer confirmed that the UK was not involved and emphasised the importance of upholding international law. The European Union also reacted. EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs Kaja Kallas and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen expressed support for the people of Venezuela and backed a peaceful and democratic transition. Russia condemned the US military actions as armed aggression and called for dialogue, warning that Maduro's capture could further escalate tensions in the region. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei stressed the need to stand firm against external pressure on the country and its people. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha highlighted human rights violations under Maduro's regime and called for respect for international law, democracy, and the interests of the Venezuelan people.
Joining us now to unpack this developing story is political analyst Diogo Castro Silva and political scientist Daniela Mello. Thank you both for joining us. Now, Diogo, I'd like to start with you. We are expecting that press conference from Trump. We're hearing that it's been delayed, but when it does come, what are you expecting to hear from the US president?
Well, hi there. I am expecting a triumphant tone. Because of the success, the narrow definition of success of the military operation. So I will expect a very triumphant tone from President Trump on this question. However, saying that, this is also, this operation is also geared towards domestic audience in the US. So I'm expecting to see this tying in with the anti-immigration, anti-drugs, all of this rhetoric which is the administration is being carrying to.
Daniela, let's bring you in. What are you expecting to hear from Trump? Are you also expecting this is going to be for a domestic audience?
Well, first of all, good afternoon to both of you. There are a number of audiences here. Certainly for a domestic audience, as Diogo was saying, because Donald Trump is concerned with justifying this military action against Venezuela. He's likely to pursue the same line of reasoning that he has pursued thus far, that this is a justified incursion into the affairs of Venezuela, because in his justification and in the justification of his defense and State Departments, he has accused Maduro of being directly involved in narco-terrorism against the United States. And he has also argued to our own Congress and to our own people here in the United States that Venezuela is being led by a narco-terrorist who presents a national security threat to the American people and who is responsible for the deaths, indirectly responsible for the deaths of many people who died from overdoses in the United States. This has been the main line of reasoning of the Trump administration. They have stuck to this explanation and to this justification, in part, and this is going back to Diogo's point about this being internal, in part because there is a very serious legal question internally in the United States regarding the ability of the President of the United States to be able to intervene in the affairs of foreign states like this. And he's making the argument that this is narco-terrorism in particular, to try to avoid having the participation and the consent of Congress to be able to do this type of operation. And as far as we know right now, Congress was not involved in this decision, was not involved in this, was perhaps not even truly consulted or even warned ahead of the operation. On the other hand, there is also an external dimension to this, of course. Let's remember that just a few weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, roughly, the United States government made public its national strategy. And its new national strategy very clearly delineates that there's a geographic focus on Latin America, on the Western Hemisphere, as a new focus of US foreign policy. It basically states very plainly that the United States views this geography, this area in particular, Latin America, North America. This also, by the way, also including Greenland. So the Europeans should also be perking up in terms of the ambitions that the presidency has there. But basically, the national strategy says that this is the new sphere of influence, new and old, they argue, sphere of influence of the United States, and that the United States will do whatever is within its power to safeguard its interests within its national security, within its national sphere of influence. So, in short, what that means is that the United States was arguing to the world, and Donald Trump has made it quite clearly to the world that he is not concerned with international law. What he is truly concerned with is the defense of what he perceives to be the national interest of the United States, even if that comes at the cost of aggression and breaches of international law.
Now, we are getting some movement in Mar-a-Lago. Our viewers will see that they are getting ready for that press conference. We're expecting that to start any minute now, so apologies in advance if I do have to cut either of you off. Now, Diogo, some have described this as a liberation of Venezuela, but others view this as an attack on Venezuela's sovereignty. What do you make of these opposing viewpoints?
Well, the first thing you have to say is that the Maduro regime was odious for many Venezuelans, and its passing away is not to mourn. However, saying this, the question of liberation of the people of Venezuela, let us see what happens afterwards. Because we want to implement democracy in Venezuela, there will need to be a lot of investment in place in terms of political commitment of the US. Is the administration willing to do this? Because if you break it, you own it. So it's not clear if even Corina Machado, who won the last elections, will come to power. I think the administration would be pretty comfortable if a general of the present regime would have stepped up and take its place. So it's very unclear if that this will bring the liberation of the people of Venezuela. The other question, which is important to note, even on the terrorism, the narco-terrorism, like Daniela said, that's been used as justification, President Trump just pardoned the ex-president of Honduras, who was in fact convicted and in jail in the US for exactly drug trafficking. So it's very hard to understand why you pardon Hernandez and now you seize Maduro. So there is a lot of other agendas that are behind this. What I must say also in the region is that obviously you will have reactions dividing themselves along partisan lines. So you'll see some countries applauding like Argentina, others against like Colombia and Brazil. But I would dare to say that behind the scenes, everyone, every military planner in the region will take notice and will think about who can come next, under what justification can come next. Because as Daniela said, we have Greenland in the continent, we have Cuba, and who knows, other countries where the US might find a justification for intervening. So we are really in a new world, and in a world where international law counts for nothing, because even this case, the US didn't even make a pretense to justify it in an international stage, not even at the UN. So we are really in a world where might is right, and that will pose a lot of interrogations for a lot of people in different countries in the region and in the rest of the world.
Now, Daniela, what do we know so far about how the US managed this operation?
Well, we knew that the United States used a Delta Force. It's a special operation. It's the language that is also being used around here. We also knew that the CIA had been present on the ground and probably acquiring assets for quite a long time in Colombia. So I imagine that there was quite a coordination. There had to be quite a coordination between the forces that were on the ground to capture Maduro and the strikes, and the CIA and the assets that the CIA had acquired over the period. Trump did not really hide the fact that it was carrying this type. He was carrying this type of operation. What's so incredible here is that even with all the signals that President Trump has given us since he returned to power, it still seemed a step too far, I would say, to many of us who get to watch on the sidelines. It seemed like a step too far for the president to put troops on the ground. We still don't know exactly the details of that, whether there were troops on the ground, whether this was, I mean, it wasn't just an air operation, obviously. We had to have people on the ground who were capturing Maduro and his wife and transporting him. He's apparently being transported by ship to New York, according to President Trump in an interview that he gave to Fox and Friends this morning. So we know basically the general sketch of what happened, but we don't actually know the details of how this operation was carried through beyond what President Trump has told the media. Like President Trump talked this morning about the fact that they had a miniature version of the place where they captured Maduro with all the doors, entries, and he seemed really taken by this specific detail. But what that tells us is that we had a very strong, carefully prepared operation by the intelligence services, by the defense, by the Department of War, it's now called in the United States, and by the Secretary of State and the State Department in coordination with whatever assets they acquired on the ground in Venezuela. Excuse me, I'm about to say Colombia, in Venezuela, and this is, I mean, clearly it was a successful operation, and they were able to get Maduro before he was able to run away to safety, which apparently he was doing at the time that he was captured.
Now, Diogo, what does international law have to say about all of this? We've talked about how it's unprecedented. So what does this mean from an international law perspective?
Well, in terms of international law, it means we have no law right now, because even if morally, of course, in Ukraine is totally different from Venezuela, it's a democratic leader and everything. In terms of international law, these interventions you have from Russia, now you have from the US, it creates a permissive environment that everybody can do whatever it wants if it has the power to do so. And this, I might argue, is going back to the 19th century, and it's a greatly more unsafe world. For example, I would say that a lot of countries will be thinking even more about having nuclear weapons. So you are talking about nuclear proliferation. And all of this points to a much more unstable and dangerous world that we are going to live. Because in the law of the jungle, to be herbivorous is not a good idea. So everybody's going to think about defense, security, and the US will become much more alone, acting as a superpower. It is, but it's much harder to bring the international community along. So what you will have is this fragmented world where might is right, and this is precisely the era we are living for some time, that had this acute example in Ukraine, and I'm getting pretty sure we'll have a similar thing happen in Asia not in so much a distant future. And this will bring, like I said, a much more unstable and unsafe world for us all, unfortunately.
Now, just to bring you an update on that press conference, we are expecting Trump in the coming few minutes or seconds. So as I say, apologies if I cut you off, Daniela, but could you talk us through the global reaction to this?
Well, the reactions have been varied depending on the political alignment of the countries and blocs reacting, and that has been very clear. So we've had reactions against this incursion and calling it an illegal incursion into the sovereignty of Venezuela, which, according to international law, there is no doubt this is an illegal incursion into the sovereignty of Venezuela. And that the United States is, in fact, in breach of the international law that it has helped to create and uphold over the past 70 years. Those reactions have come from Russia, and they have come from neighbors like Brazil in Latin America, and they're to be expected. I mean, especially Latin America right now, all the leaders in Latin America in particular have to be questioning what does this mean for them, especially the leaders of countries that neighbor Venezuela, like Colombia, but also Cuba, which was heavily dependent on Venezuelan oil, for instance, for its survival during the economic crisis that it has been facing for years now. So this could mean, in fact, a redrawing of the balance of power in the U.S.'s sphere of influence, to use the Trump administration's language on this. And in fact, nothing seems to point to the fact that it will stop here. Quite the contrary. President Donald Trump, having written this, I stress once again, into the national security strategy of the United States, has basically warned the world that he is willing to do whatever it takes to safeguard the national political, economic, and security interests of the United States. From Europe, for instance, we saw a reaction that was, I would say, not quite as strong as it could have been, certainly not quite as strong as we had from the countries that strongly opposed this. Ursula von der Leyen, for instance, this morning issued a statement that very much called for that looks forward to the next few steps within Venezuela, and called for law to be upheld, international law to be upheld, and for the Venezuelans to seek democracy or democratic transition. This language is probably indicative of the tough situation in which the European Union finds itself, and this brave new world in which the United States, as Diogo was well stating, is going at it alone and in pursuit of its interests in sometimes rather rapacious ways. Why do I say this? Because obviously the European Union is under the security umbrella provided by the United States through NATO. It became acutely aware of the need to find its own strategic alternative in the past few years, but it hasn't had the time to really make that transition. And what this means in practice is that the Europeans still need the Americans. And even though the relationship between the Europeans and the Americans has never been perhaps chillier, certainly since the Second World War, they recognize that they still need the United States, not just for the security umbrella of the EU, but for the security umbrella of the EU in relation to the threat that Russia is now presenting, and of course for the needs of the Ukrainians on the ground who depend heavily on arms and ammunition coming from the United States to be able to continue its war effort against the Russians.
And what happens now, not only to Maduro, but what does this mean for the governance of Venezuela?
Is that for me or for Diogo?
That's for you.
Thank you. That's unclear. What we had today was an operation to remove the president of a country. However, that government remains in power. That government is still now being led by now the vice president. the Minister of Defense and the Minister of the Interior, both strong allies of Maduro, had made very aggressive remarks against the United States incursion into the sovereign territory of Venezuela. And I mean, at least rhetorically at the moment, they are very combatant. So what this means is that internally, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. In fact, we don't know if the United States has any plan of remaining involved in the internal affairs of Venezuela. But what happens if the United States has removed Maduro, but basically left in place the regime? Will the United States then be willing to once again carry another operation, carry other future strikes to be able to fully remove this government or not? I guess what I'm trying to say is, in short term, we don't know. And in fact, what I would be paying quite a lot of attention to is what happens with those who have the monopoly of violence of the state. And what do I mean by that? That's a sentence that we frequently used in political science. Those who have the weapons. What is the military going to do? What are the military generals going to do? Are they going to remain united? Are they going to remain allied with Chavismo, with Maduro, or are they going to splinter? Are they going to sit on their hands and allow the civilians to play out this politically with elections or with a campaign? We know that Corina Machado has asked Maria Corina Machado, who received the Nobel Peace Prize and who is the face of the opposition, and who, in fact, we know has the support of the United States, even though the President of the United States this morning made a comment to the contrary. But Maria Corina Machado has asked publicly that the military, that the armed forces basically accept or recognize Edmundo Gonzalez as the true president of Venezuela. Gonzalez, just to remember everyone who's listening, is the individual who, according to most international organizations, including the United Nations, won the elections last year, if I'm not mistaken, on 2024, and those elections were stolen by Maduro. That's the general international consensus. I mean, there's little doubt here that Maduro is himself not exactly a legitimate leader of the country, but this doesn't take away from the fact that there's a serious breach of the sovereignty of Venezuela by the United States. But just to conclude this point about internally, you have to look at what the army is doing, what the armed forces are doing, what the colectivos, which are these basic militias for the defense of the regime that are spread all over the country, are going to do in the next few hours and in the next few days. See whether people come out to the streets. So far, there has been a very timid reaction, in part because the population themselves recognize that the regime hasn't fallen. And if regime hasn't fallen, the vacuum of power is not quite there yet, or certainly not being understood as being there already. And this could lead to, a democratic transition in the best, or a democratic restitution, if we want. But it's more likely to not, in part because, as a political scientist, we study regime transitions quite carefully. Regime transitions that are pushed from the outside in tend to lack all legitimacy. Maria Corina Machado herself needs to be quite careful right now not to lose legitimacy, because if she allies herself too much with the United States and with the positions of the United States, she herself could be seen, even by those who wanted Maduro out, but she could be seen as someone who would be a puppet president for the interests of the United States, for instance. So this is a very volatile moment. The easy part is completely done. The hard part is understanding how do we get Venezuela to a stable point. How do we get Venezuela to a stable point politically, economically, in terms of its security? It doesn't look pretty. I hate to say it like this. It's fairly blunt, but it's quite likely that there will be confrontations. I mean, there's plenty of scenarios that could play up here. A split in the military, a split between the police forces and the military. Or they could all just band together and hold on to the regime and further repress Venezuela and sink Venezuela further deeper into authoritarianism. So nobody has that answer right now. What's coming next?
Now, just to remind our viewers that we are still waiting for that press conference from Trump. Now, just to go back to your answer, Daniela, from a public safety perspective, how concerned are you about that uncertainty at the moment?
I'm very concerned, and every single person living in Venezuela, no matter how radiant they may be that Maduro is finally removed, is concerned for their safety. I mean, we've already heard about the run to the supermarkets. That indicates very clearly the fear that people immediately felt of not being able to leave their houses, of having to seek security for themselves and their families, certainly in the immediate term. But looking at other moments like this, again, it's far more likely that we have instability and violence than not. So this really allows for, especially if the United States basically takes an attitude of, you figure it out now, and we won't strike again. I mean, Marco Rubio said earlier this morning that the United States would not be striking again, would not be attacking again, but I am reticent to take that as a promise that the United States is done intervening. Because, again, from the point of view of the United States, it is, and from the point of view of the American government, it is their interest to get whatever new leader, whatever new regime comes into power to align itself with the interests of the United States in the region. That is very clearly stated by this administration. This administration wants restitution for the nationalization of the oil industry that happened during Chavez. It wants American companies to be able to benefit from oil extraction in the region. And I mean, at least on paper, this administration is also claiming that basically this will stop drugs from being trafficked through Venezuela or from Venezuela. So at the end of the day, if you're a Venezuelan, right now you're looking at the situation and you're thinking, how do I seek security? How do I safeguard myself and my family? So honestly, there might be a run to the banks if we haven't seen that already. A run to the supermarkets, seeking of shelter, and again, we also have very little information, in part because it's hard to penetrate into various parts of the country, but very little information about how people are organizing. We saw some demonstrations in favor of Maduro earlier today, but that may not necessarily signal much. Those were peaceful demonstrations that clearly were also okayed by the government, if not organized by the government that is still in power right now. It might evolve very rapidly into, violent clashes on the streets. Even if it stays quiet for 2 or 3 days, as people run out of supplies, as people need to come back to their regular lives, we may see, in fact, a quick development or a quick decay of the ability of the government to keep control over the streets. We have no idea right now. I mean, to be perfectly honest, this could play up in a number of scenarios, but none of them are exactly, the scenario of this particular armed forces agreeing to Edmundo Gonzalez coming in as the legitimate president of Venezuela seems quite unlikely to me, because that would be the armed forces, they who benefit from the regime as much as Maduro, because Maduro spent many, many years buttering up, being, many years creating a solid base of support for him at the top echelons of the military. It is quite unlikely for them to then come to the country and say, yes, we recognize that Maduro was not legitimately elected, because that would in fact mine their own legitimacy within the country. It would be an admission, and it would be seen as an admission that they were part of the corruption that maintained Maduro in power. It does not seem likely unless the United States is willing to continue intervening and perhaps pushing some of these generals out and pushing the rest of the Maduro government out. So we don't know. It's this level of uncertainty is basically leads us to incredible volatility.
And just to go back to that American perspective there, we're seeing Trump intervene in foreign policy issues increasingly. How is that going down with the American public, with his voters who elected him as an America First president?
That's an excellent question. In fact, the MAGA movement and the MAGA base, the electoral base that supported Donald Trump, is divided on the issue of this type of interventionism. So we saw that division more starkly around U.S. intervention in Israel and the Israeli conflict with U.S. aid to Israel in the conflict within Palestine, within Israel, in Palestine, and against Iran, in the strikes against Iran, where Trump saw himself for the very first time heavily criticized by his own base, by influencers, by very strong influencers, people like Tucker Carlson in the media sphere of the right and of his MAGA movement. Within Congress, we know we have several voices, both in the Senate and in the House, voices within the Republican Party that oppose U.S. incursions into situations and into conflicts that do not directly threaten the United States. And the argument that the president has been making has been twofold. On one hand, that this is in fact justified and that we do have a national security threat. On the other hand, that because this is narco-terrorism, it falls only within the powers of the executive office, and that he does not need to rely on Congress or even on his own party, right, in Congress, to support him on these decisions, that this is just the purview of the president. Well, we had already been having in the country a very big fight about the extent to which the executive power was basically appropriating itself from constitutionally appropriating itself from powers that belong to the Congress alone. That fight now is going to be on fire. And in fact, the biggest rebuke that we've seen of the president's actions has come from the Democrats. We are yet to hear many voices rising within the Republican Party, but I'd be surprised if they didn't. I mean, Maduro is a heavily disliked individual amongst Americans, and certainly amongst Venezuelan Americans and other Latinos who live in the United States. And in fact, the images that you have from the Venezuelan diaspora in the United States itself is of joy, jubilation, of a sense of relief and gratitude that the United States decided to shift its attention to Venezuela and remove this leader. There is no doubt that this was an autocratic leader who probably committed many crimes against humanity himself within the borders of his own state. But there's also very little doubt that the United States itself breached international law and created an incredible, dangerous precedent that honestly I can only compare to March 2023 and the incursion of the United States into Iraq under the justification of seeking weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein was, according to the United States government at the time, under the Bush and Cheney administration, that supposedly Iraq was holding. There's an incredible parallel here. And if history teaches us anything, is that that parallel does not bode well for the democratic transition in the country in which this operation has just taken place. So the American public over the next few days is going to be absorbing this. It's going to be comparing the situations. Is going to be assessing the type of justifications that the president provides and the type of response that the Congress provides. We might even see some court cases related to various aspects of this operation as more information is uncovered about whether, for instance, American soldiers were deployed on the ground, whether they were boots on the ground is how we tend to refer to it, and whether the president has in fact breached the law within the United States by acting beyond his constitutional powers. Now, because this is a legal battle, and I keep coming back to the constitutionality of the question, we are likely to see this
I'm
play
sorry
out
to
in
cut
the
you off,
courts.
Daniela, but Trump is now
Sure.
arriving, so we're going to go now to that press conference in Mar-a-Lago.
Appreciate you being here. Late last night and early today, at my direction, the United States Armed Forces conducted an extraordinary military operation in the capital of Venezuela. Overwhelming American military power, air, land, and sea, was used to launch a spectacular assault. And it was an assault like people have not seen since World War II. It was a force against a heavily fortified military fortress in the heart of Caracas to bring outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history. And if you think about it, we've done some other good ones, like the attack on Soleimani, the attack on al-Baghdadi, and the obliteration and decimation of the Iran nuclear sites just recently in an operation known as Midnight Hammer, all perfectly executed and done. No nation in the world could achieve what America achieved yesterday, or frankly, in just a short period of time. All Venezuelan military capacities were rendered powerless as the men and women of our military, working with U.S. law enforcement, successfully captured Maduro in the dead of night. It was dark. The lights of Caracas were largely turned off due to a certain expertise that we have. It was dark and it was deadly. But captured along with his wife, Celia Flores, both of whom now face American justice. Maduro and Flores have been indicted in the Southern District of New York, it's Jay Clayton, for their campaign of deadly narco-terrorism against the United States and its citizens. I want to thank the men and women of our military who achieved such an extraordinary success overnight with breathtaking speed, power, precision, and competence. You rarely see anything like it. You've seen some raids in this country that didn't go so well. They were an embarrassment. If you look back to Afghanistan, or if you look back to the Jimmy Carter days, they were different days. We're a respected country again, like never before. These highly trained warriors, operating in collaboration with U.S. law enforcement, caught them in a very ready position. They were waiting for us. They knew we had many ships out in the sea, just sort of waiting. They knew we were coming. So they were in a ready, what's called a ready position. But they were completely overwhelmed and very quickly incapacitated. If you would have seen what I saw last night, you would have been very impressed. I'm not sure that you'll ever get to see it, but it was an incredible thing to see. Not a single American service member was killed, and not a single piece of American equipment was lost. We had many helicopters, many planes, many people involved in that fight. But think of that, not one piece of military equipment was lost, not one service member was, more importantly, killed. The United States military is the strongest and most fearsome military on the planet by far. with capabilities and skills our enemies can scarcely begin to imagine. We have the best equipment anywhere in the world. There's no equipment like what we have. And you see that even if you just look at the boats. You know, we've knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by sea. 90%. Each boat kills on average, 25,000 people. We knocked out 97%. And those drugs mostly come from a place called Venezuela. We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. So we don't want to be involved with having somebody else get in, and we have the same situation that we had for the last long period of years. So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela, and that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland. We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind. We've had decades of that. We're not going to let that happen. We're there now, and what people don't understand, but they understand as I say this, we're there now, but we're going to stay until such time as the proper transition can take place. So we're going to stay until such time as we're going to run it, essentially, until such time as a proper transition can take place. As everyone knows, the oil business in Venezuela has been a bust, a total bust, for a long period of time. They were pumping almost nothing by comparison to what they could have been pumping and what could have taken place. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. And we are ready to stage a second and much larger attack if we need to do so. So we were prepared to do a second wave if we needed to do so. We actually assumed that a second wave would be necessary, but now it's probably not. The first wave, if you'd like to call it that, the first attack was so successful, we probably don't have to do a second, but we're prepared to do a second wave, a much bigger wave, actually. This was pinpoint, but we have a much bigger wave that probably won't have to do. This partnership of Venezuela with the United States of America, a country that everybody wants to be involved with because of what we were able to do and accomplish, will make the people of Venezuela rich, independent, and safe. And it will also make the many, many people from Venezuela that are living in the United States extremely happy. They suffered. They suffered. So much was taken from them. They're not going to suffer anymore. The illegitimate dictator Maduro was the kingpin of a vast criminal network responsible for trafficking colossal amounts of deadly and illicit drugs into the United States. As alleged in the indictment, he personally oversaw the vicious cartel known as Cartel de las Solas, which flooded our nation with lethal poison, responsible for the deaths of countless Americans, the many, many Americans. Hundreds of thousands over the years of Americans died because of him. Maduro and his wife will soon face the full might of American justice and stand trial on American soil. Right now, they're on a ship they'll be heading to, ultimately, New York. And then a decision will be made, I assume, between New York and Miami or Florida. But we have people where the overwhelming evidence of their crimes will be presented in a court of law. And I've seen it. I've seen what we have. It's It's both horrible and breathtaking that something like this could have been allowed to take place. For many years after his term as president of Venezuela expired, Maduro remained in power and waged a ceaseless campaign of violence, terror, and subversion against the United States of America, threatening not only our people, but the stability of the entire region. And you all saw it. In addition to trafficking gigantic amounts of illegal drugs that inflicted untold suffering and human destruction all over the country, all over, in particular, the United States, Maduro sent savage and murderous gangs, including the bloodthirsty prison gang Tren de Aragua, to terrorize American communities nationwide. And he did indeed. They were in Colorado. They took over apartment complexes. They cut the fingers off people if they called police. They were brutal, but they're not so brutal now. And I just have to congratulate our military, Pete and everybody, and our National Guard, because the job that they've done, whether it's in Washington, D.C., where we have a totally safe city, where it was one of the most unsafe cities anywhere in the world, frankly, and now we have no crime in Washington, D.C. We haven't had a killing. We had the terrorist attack a few weeks ago, a little bit of a different kind of a threat, but we haven't had a killing in a long period of time, 6-7 months. We used to have two, on average, 2 a week in Washington, our capital. We don't have that anymore. The restaurants are opening. Everyone's happy. They're going, they're walking their daughters, they're walking their children, their wives. They walk to restaurants. Restaurants are opening all over Washington, D.C. So I want to thank the National Guard. I want to thank our military. And I want to thank law enforcement. It's been amazing. And they should do it with more cities. We're doing it, as you know, and we're doing it in Memphis, Tennessee right now, and crime is down. We've just sort of started a few weeks ago, but crime is down now 77%. And the governor of Louisiana called, great person, and he wanted us to help him, as you know, in a certain very nice part of Louisiana. And we have done that. And it was a rough section, and we have crime down. I understand it's down to almost nothing already after 2.5 weeks. New Orleans, it's down to almost nothing. And we've only been there for 2.5 weeks. Can't imagine why governors wouldn't want us to help. We also helped, as you know, in Chicago, and crime went down a little bit there. We did a very small help because we had no working ability with the governor. The governor was a disaster, and the mayor was a disaster. But it knocked down crime. But we're pulling out of there when they need us. We'll know. You'll know. You'll be writing about it. And likewise, Los Angeles, where we saved Los Angeles early on, where the head of the police department made a statement that if the federal government didn't come in, we would have lost Los Angeles. That's long after the fires. That's when they had the riots in Los Angeles. We did a great job. Got no credit for it whatsoever, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. We don't need the credit. But we'll be pulling out when they need us. They'll call, or we'll go back if we have to. We'll go back. But we did a great job in various cities. But the place that we're very proud of is Washington, D.C., because it's our nation's capital. We took it from being a crime-ridden mess to being one of the safest cities in the country. But the gangs that they sent raped, tortured, and murdered American women and children. They were in all of the cities I mentioned, Tren de Aragua. And they were sent by Maduro to terrorize our people, and now Maduro will never again be able to threaten an American citizen or anybody from Venezuela. There will no longer be threats. For years, I've highlighted the stories of those innocent Americans whose lives were so heartlessly robbed by this Venezuelan terrorist organization. Really one of the worst. One of the worst, they say the worst. Americans like 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungary from Houston. Beautiful Jocelyn Nungary, what happened to her? They, as you know, they kidnapped, assaulted, and murdered by Tren de Aragua animals. They murdered Jocelyn. And left her dead under the bridge. There was a bridge that will never be the same to so many people after seeing what happened. As I've said many times, the Maduro regime emptied out their prisons, sent their worst and most violent monsters into the United States to steal American lives. And they came from mental institutions and insane asylums. They came from prisons and jails. The reason I say both, they sound similar. Actually, prisons a little bit more hostile, a little bit tougher. A mental institution isn't as tough as an insane asylum, but we got them both. They sent from their mental institutions. They sent from their jails, prisons. They were drug dealers. They were drug kingpins. They sent everybody bad into the United States, but no longer. And we have now a border where nobody gets through. In addition, Venezuela unilaterally seized and stole American oil, American assets, and American platforms, costing us billions and billions of dollars. They did this a while ago, but we never had a president that did anything about it. They took all of our property. It was our property. We built it. And we never had a president that decided to do anything about it. Instead, they fought wars that were 10,000 miles away. We built Venezuela oil industry with American talent, drive, and skill, and the socialist regime stole it from us during those previous administrations, and they stole it through force. This constituted one of the largest thefts of American property in the history of our country. Considered the largest theft of property in the history of our country. Massive oil infrastructure was taken like we were babies, and we didn't do anything about it. I would have done something about it. America will never allow foreign powers to rob our people or drive us back into and out of our own hemisphere. That's what they did. Furthermore, under the now deposed dictator Maduro, Venezuela was increasingly hosting foreign adversaries in our region and acquiring menacing offensive weapons that could threaten U.S. interests and lives. And they used those weapons last night. Potentially in league with the cartels operating along our border. All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Document. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. Won't happen. So just in concluding, for decades, other administrations have neglected or even contributed to these growing security threats in the Western Hemisphere. Under the Trump administration, we are reasserting American power in a very powerful way in our home region. And our home region is very different than it was just a short while ago. The future will be, and we did this in my first term. We had great dominance in my first term, and we have far greater dominance right now. Everyone's coming back to us. The future will be determined by the ability to protect commerce and territory and resources that are core to national security. These are core to our national security. Just like tariffs are, they've made our country rich, and they've made our national security stronger than ever before. But these are the iron laws that have always determined global power. And we're going to keep it that way. We will secure our borders. We will stop the terrorists. We will crash the cartels, and we will defend our citizens against all threats, foreign and domestic. Other presidents may have lacked the courage or whatever to defend America, but I will never allow terrorists and criminals to operate with impunity against the United States. This extremely successful operation should serve as warning to anyone who would threaten American sovereignty or endanger American lives. Very importantly, the embargo on all Venezuelan oil remains in full effect. The American Armada remains poised in position, and the United States retains all military options until United States demands have been fully met and fully satisfied. All political and military figures in Venezuela should understand what happened to Maduro can happen to them, and it will happen to them if they aren't just, fair, even to their people. The dictator and terrorist Maduro is finally gone, and Venezuela people are free. They're free again. It's been a long time for them, but they're free. America is a safer nation. This morning, it's a prouder nation this morning because it didn't allow this horrible person and this country that was doing very bad things to us. It didn't allow it to happen. And the Western Hemisphere is right now a much safer place to be. So I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank General Raising Cane. He's a fantastic man. I've worked with a lot of generals. I worked with some I didn't like. I worked with some I didn't respect. I worked with some that just weren't good. But this guy is fantastic. I watched last night one of the most precise attacks on sovereignty. I mean, it was an attack for justice. And I'm very proud of him, and I'm very proud of our Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, who I'm going to ask to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, can you explain how the U.S. will run Venezuela?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Finally, a commander-in-chief the world respects and the American people deserve. And as the President said, words can barely capture the bravery and the power and the precision of this historic operation. A massive joint military and law enforcement raid flawlessly executed by the greatest Americans our country has to offer. American warriors are second to none, the best in the world and the best of our country. What all of us witnessed last night was sheer guts and grit, gallantry and glory of the American warrior. I'm simply humbled by such men. And I tip my hat to our chairman, Dan Raising Cane, and all those Americans who stood watch last night. Our warriors are the elite of America, and again, President Trump has your back. No other country on planet Earth, and it's not even close, could pull this kind of operation off. And no other president has ever shown this kind of leadership, courage, and resolve, the most powerful combination the world has ever seen. As the President said, our adversaries remain on notice. America can project our will anywhere, anytime. The coordination, the stealth, the lethality, the precision, the very long arm of American justice, all on full display in the middle of the night. Nicolas Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around, and he found out. President Trump is deadly serious about stopping the flow of gangs and violence to our country. Deadly serious about stopping the flow of drugs and poison to our people. Deadly serious about getting back the oil that was stolen from us. And deadly serious about reestablishing American deterrence and dominance in the Western Hemisphere. This is about the safety, security, freedom, and prosperity of the American people. This is America first. This is peace through strength. And the United States War Department is proud to help deliver it. Welcome to 2026. And under President Trump, America is back. I'd like to welcome now our chairman, Chairman Raising Cane, to give a few more details about the operation. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning. Last night, on the order of the President of the United States and in support of a request from the Department of Justice, as the President said, the United States military conducted an apprehension mission in Caracas, Venezuela, to bring to justice two indicted persons, Nicolas and Cecilia Maduro. This operation, known as Operation Absolute Resolve, was discreet, precise, and conducted during the darkest hours of January 2nd and was the culmination of months of planning and rehearsal, an operation that, frankly, only the United States military could undertake. What I'd like to do this morning is talk to you through some of the preparation and the details without compromising any of our tactics, techniques, and procedures. There is always a chance that we'll be tasked to do this type of mission again. Our interagency work began months ago and built on decades of experience of integrating complex air, ground, space, and maritime operations. While the past 2 decades have honed the skills of our special operations forces, this particular mission required every component of our joint force, with soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians working in unison with our intelligence agency partners and law enforcement teammates in an unprecedented operation. We leveraged our unmatched intelligence capabilities and our years of experience in hunting terrorists, and we could not have done this mission without the incredible work by various intelligence agencies, including the CIA, NSA, and NGA. We watched, we waited, we prepared, we remained patient and professional. This mission was meticulously planned, drawing lessons from decades of missions over the last many years, many missions over these last many years. This was an audacious operation that only the United States could do. It required the utmost of precision and integration within our joint force. And the word integration does not explain the sheer complexity of such a mission. An extraction so precise it involved more than 150 aircraft launching across the Western Hemisphere in close coordination, all coming together in time and place to layer effects for a single purpose: to get an interdiction force into downtown Caracas while maintaining the element of tactical surprise. Failure of one component of this well-oiled machine would have endangered the entire mission, and failure is never an option for America's joint force. Those in the air over Caracas last night were willing to give their lives for those on the ground and in the helicopters. Let me talk a little bit about the preparation. After months of work by our intelligence teammates to find Maduro and understand how he moved, where he lived, where he traveled, what he ate, what he wore, what were his pets, in early December, our force was set pending a series of aligned events.
Well, there we have it, words from both President Trump and Pete Hegseth. There now still with us is political scientist Daniela Mello, and joining us now is our Washington correspondent Ubi Spandar. Ubi, this is America first, were the words from Pete Hegseth. Is it? What's your reaction to this?
Well, after a daring American Special Forces operation that was apparently supported by the Central Intelligence Agency, the former leader of Venezuela is now going to be an American prisoner. Now, we've heard from President Trump, from the Secretary of War, and from the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff explaining to us their thinking, their justification, and the operational planning that went into the capture of Nicolas Maduro and the destruction of Venezuela's air defense systems. We heard from the Secretary of War telling us that what we witnessed last night, in his words, was a display of sheer guts and gallantry. The Trump administration is saying that Nicolas Maduro is indicted by the Southern District of New York for narco-terrorism. So the justification here by the Trump administration, by the president, who is the commander-in-chief of all American armed forces and the Secretary of War, and we've also heard on social media from the Attorney General Pam Bondi that Nicolas Maduro has been indicted by American law for conspiracy to move drugs. And in the words of the U.S. government, narco terrorism. That is what the Trump administration is using as the justification for this extraordinary military operation. Hundreds of miles had to be traversed by the Delta Force Tier 1 Special Forces operators from their American bases in the Caribbean into downtown Caracas, an area that American intelligence and Delta Force Special Forces operators knew where Maduro was moving, where he was going, and they were able to capture him before he was able to go underground. Politically, the President Trump has also said that this is about taking back American oil assets that were stolen or nationalized by Venezuela years ago. So that is a major, also political justification made by the president on why this extraordinary operation to remove the government and the former leader of Venezuela, someone that President Trump has called a dictator and a narco-terrorist, to remove Maduro from power. President Trump said that American oil companies are going to go into Venezuela and to rebuild that oil infrastructure, as well as he opened the possibility of a second wave of even larger military operations in Venezuela. So that remains to be seen if that will be taken. A warning was sent by President Trump to other countries in the region. He mentioned Iran, saying that any other country that tries to test American resolve will face similar military operations. So we've also heard from Vice President J.D. Vance on social media saying that this was about protecting American citizens, hundreds of thousands who have died from fentanyl and from drug overdoses. And so protecting American citizens is keeping America first as the core American foreign policy doctrine. So that is what we're hearing from the Trump administration as the American people wake up to the news that America Delta Force operators, Central Intelligence Agency agents flew into the center of Caracas, grabbed Maduro and his wife, put him in an American helicopter, flew him into an American Navy warship, and now he is being flown to face justice in New York.
Now, Daniela, just to bring you in, Trump says we're going to run the country till there's a safe, proper, judicious transition. So no more doubts there about American involvement in this, but Trump's also going to have to deal with the consequences of what he's just done today, isn't he?
In fact, before Mr. Trump came to make his declarations, we were discussing what exactly was the plan of the United States for the transition. And now we have a very partial and still vague response. We know that the United States so far is going to be running the show, running the country. We don't know exactly what that means, but what that means in particular, and that much we do know, is that the United States is clearly not going to abide by the Maduro party and the Maduro regime staying in power and maintaining its positions of power. I would take this as a direct threat if I was the vice president right now, and if I was a minister in this government. It's very clear that Donald Trump is not going to allow, or whatever team Donald Trump puts in the country is not going to allow those individuals to retain their positions, and in fact, they might be in danger of being arrested. So it's going to be interesting, to say the least, to see how these individuals react in the next few hours. I want to say, though, I mentioned this already in our earlier conversation, but it's hard not to listen to these declarations and to not see echoes of 2003 and the U.S. invasion of Iraq. Different justifications, but along the same lines in terms of national security and protection of American lives. In terms of a justification that most believe inside and outside of the United States is not the true motivation that is leading to the United States to take a role in the running of the country. And hopefully, from the point of view of the United States and of Venezuela, it will be a transition that occurs better and faster than it did in 2003. I remember clearly President Bush coming to the podium and having the banner mission accomplished behind him, and claiming that the United States had swiftly gotten rid of Saddam Hussein and was now working on the transition and the preparation of elections in Iraq. That was wishful thinking. When it comes to transitions, things get really hairy. So let me give an example here. As we saw in Iraq, as we saw in other parts of the world, transitioning a country to democracy without internal legitimacy is a very difficult, if not impossible, cause. Even when it works in the short term, it tends to fail in the long term because it creates a new group of individuals who are now hurt by this incursion into the country. So we might be seeing counterinsurgency efforts, for instance. We might be seeing organizing by Maduro factions that have access to weapons, that have access to military training, and who know the country
Sorry
quite
to
well
chime
and
in
might
there,
be willing
Daniela.
to fight it
Marco
out.
Rubio is speaking, so we're just going to have a listen to what he has to say.
Not a game player. When he tells you that he's going to do something, when tells you he's going to address a problem, he means it. He actions it. I can tell you, I've watched this process now for 14, 15 years, been around it. Everybody talks. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. When I get there, we're going to do this. We're going to take. This is a president of action. Like, I don't understand yet how they haven't figured this out. And now, if you don't know, now you know. Because this is the way it's going to play out. And I think people need to understand that this is not a president that just talks and does letters and press conferences. And, you know, if he says he's serious about something, he means it. And this is something that was a direct threat to the national interest of the United States, and the president addressed it. There's a president of peace, by the way. I told you what I just said earlier. This guy had multiple opportunities to find his way somewhere else and figure out another. He could have been living somewhere else right now, very happy, but instead he wanted to play big boy. And so now, you know, he's got other sets of problems on his hands. And but I think the message here should be for the world. Look, the president doesn't go out looking for people to pick fights with. He's not generally wants to get along with everybody. We'll talk and meet with anybody, but don't play games. Don't play games with this president's in office, because it's not going to turn out well. And so I hope that I guess that lesson was learned last night, and we hope it'll be instructive moving forward.
Is that a message for Cuba, Mr. President?
Mr. President,
Mr. President,
Mr. President, you said that the U.S. is going to run Venezuela. So who's in power right now?
Well, we're going to be running it with a group, and we're going to make sure it's run properly. We're going to rebuild the oil infrastructure, which will cost billions of dollars. It'll be paid for by the oil companies directly. They will be reimbursed for what they're doing, but that's going to be paid. And we're going to get the oil flowing the way it should be. As you know, it was just a minor flow. It was actually a minor flow for what they have. But we're going to run it properly, and we're going to make sure the people of Venezuela are taken care of. We're going to make sure the people that were forced out of Venezuela by this thug are also taken care of.
Mr. President, does the U.S. running the country mean that U.S. troops will be on the ground? How will that work?
Well, you know, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level, actually. We're not afraid of it. We don't mind saying it. But we're going to make sure that that country is run properly. We're not doing this in vain. This is a very dangerous attack. This is an attack that could have gone very, very badly. Could have gone very badly. We could have lost a lot of people last night. We could have lost a lot of dignity. We could have lost a lot of equipment. The equipment is less important, but we could have lost a lot. And we're going to make sure that this is proper. We're there now. We're ready to go again if we have to. We're going to run the country right. It's going to be run very judiciously, very fairly. It's going to make a lot of money. We're going to give money to the people. We're going to reimburse people that were taken advantage of. We're going to take care of everybody. It's very important. We couldn't let them get away with it. You know, they stole our oil. We built that whole industry there. and they just took it over like we were nothing. And we had a president that decided not to do anything about it. So we did something about it. We're late, but we did something about it. Yeah, please.
Can you explain the exact mechanism by which you're going to run the country? Are you going to designate a U.S. official to coordinate?
Yes, it's all being done right now. We're designating people. We're talking to people. We're designating various people, and we're going to let you know who those people are.
That would run Venezuela?
Well, it's largely going to be, for a period of time, the people that are standing right behind me. We're going to be running it. We're going to be bringing it back. It's a dead, I talk about a dead country. A year and a half ago, we were a dead country. Now we're the hottest country anywhere in the world. We're a country doing better than any country anywhere in the world. And it required leadership. Venezuela has a lot of bad people in there, a lot of bad people that shouldn't be leading. We're not going to take a chance that one of those people take over for Maduro. So you can look at, and others, we have fantastic people, including people in the military. So we're going to have a group of people running it until such time as it can be put back on track, make a lot of money for the people, and give people a great way of life, and also reimbursement for people in our country that were forced out of Venezuela.
Rubio would be...
You said earlier today that you weren't going to back Machado to come back and be the opposition leader in your Fox and Friends interview. And then you also mentioned the vice president of Venezuela. Are you going to work with the vice president of Venezuela, or how do you foresee the relationship going?
I understand she was just sworn in, but she was, as you know, picked by Maduro. So Marco's working on that directly. He just had a conversation with her, and she's essentially willing to do what we think is necessary to make Venezuela great again. Very simple.
Mr. President, Colombian President Gustavo Petro, a couple weeks ago, he said he's got to watch his ass. And today he said he's not concerned about anything happening to him in the aftermath of this operation. So just what your message is about that.
Well, he has cocaine mills. He has factories where he makes cocaine. And, yeah, I think I stick by my first statement. He's making cocaine. They're sending it into the United States. So he does have to watch his ass.
Mr. President, did you notify any members of Congress in advance?
Marco, do you want to talk about that? Because you were involved in it.
Sure. We called members of Congress immediately after. This was not the kind of mission that you can do congressional notification on. It was a trigger-based mission in which conditions had to be met night after night. We watched and monitored that for a number of days. So it's just simply not the kind of mission you can call people and say, hey, we may do this at some point in the next 15 days. But it's largely a law enforcement function. Remember, at the end of the day, at its core, this was an arrest of 2 indicted fugitives of American justice, and the Department of War supported the Department of Justice in that job. Now, there are broader policy implications here, but it's just not the kind of mission that you can pre-notify because it endangers the mission.
Plus, if I could add one thing to that, Congress has a tendency to leak. This would not be good. If they leaked, General, I think it would have been maybe a very different result. But I have to say, they knew we were coming at some point, We had a lot of ships out there. They sort of knew we were coming. We went there. But Congress will leak, and we don't want leakers.
Mr. President, you were one of the only people to watch this all play out live. What was Maduro doing when the U.S. forces entered what I assume would be his home? And also, was there any point where the U.S. was considering if Maduro pushed back or resisted killing Maduro?
It could have happened. It could have happened. He was trying to get into a safe place. You know what a safe place is, all steel. And he wasn't able to make it to the door because our guys were so fast. They went through the opposition so fast. And there was a lot of opposition. People were wondering, do we get them by surprise? Sort of surprised, but they were waiting for something. It was a lot of opposition. There was a lot of gunfire. You saw some of it today. But he was trying to get to a safe place, which wasn't safe because we would have had the door blown up in about 47 seconds, they say on average, regardless of how thick the steel was. It was a very thick door. It was a very heavy door, but he was unable to get to that door. He made it to the door. He was unable to close it. Go ahead, finish.
Where is Maduro going to be in the time being right now? Do you know his exact whereabouts?
Well, eventually, ultimately, in the near future, he's going to be brought to New York.
And where is he going to be held? Where is he going to be held in New York? Do you know?
That's going to be up to the officials that do these things.
Mr. President, the U.S. has something of a mixed track record of ousting dictators without necessarily a plan for what comes afterwards. Did that weigh on your decision?
Well, that's when we had different presidents, but with me, that's not true. With me, we've had a perfect track record of winning we win a lot. And we win, if you look at Soleimani, you look at al-Baghdadi, you look at the Midnight Hammer. Midnight Hammer was incredible. Right now, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. We have essentially peace in the Middle East because of that. If we weren't successful with Midnight Hammer, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. So, with me, you've had a lot of victory. You've had only victories. You've had no losses. Yeah.
President, how long do you expect the U.S. to run Venezuela, and how soon do you want the Venezuelan people to hold elections?
So I'd like to do it quickly, but it takes a period of time. We're rebuilding. We have to rebuild their whole infrastructure. The infrastructure is rotted. It's actually very dangerous. It's blow-up territory. Oil is very dangerous. It's a very dangerous thing to take out of the ground. Can kill a lot of people. It has killed a lot of people doing just that. The infrastructure is old. It's rotted. Much of it is stuff that we put there 25 years ago, and we're going to be replacing it. And we're going to take a lot of money out so that we can take care of the country. Yeah.
Are you saying that Secretary Rubio and
Mr. President, China, Russia, and Iran have interests in Venezuela. How does this operation affect your relationships with them when it comes to the oil and the drugs?
And Russia, Russia when we get things straightened out. But in terms of other countries that want oil, we're in the oil business. We're going to sell it to them. We're not going to say we're not going to give it to them. In other words, we'll be selling oil probably in much larger doses because they couldn't produce very much because their infrastructure was so bad. So we'll be selling large amounts of oil to other countries, many of whom are using it now, but I would say many more will come.
Are you saying, Mr. President, are you saying that, Mr. President, are you saying that? Oh.
Mr. President, thank you. What is your message to the people of Venezuela today? Of course, the civilian population specifically, they have a lot of questions. What is your message to the people of Venezuela?
That you're going to have peace, justice. You're going to have some of the riches that you should have had for a long period of time. It was stolen from you. But you're going to have peace and you're going to have safety. You're going to have justice. You're going to have a country. You're going to have a real country. You're going to have potentially a great country. You know, if you go back 20 years, maybe even a little longer ago, that was a great country. And they destroyed it. Remember I said that if we lose this election, the United States will be Venezuela on steroids. That's what would have happened. Had we lost the election, the 2024 election, we suffered so badly. When you look at the border from 2020, what they did, what Joe Biden administration did to our country should never be forgotten. But if we had to go through another year of that, we would be exactly where Venezuela was in terms. I used to say, if they win, we're going to be Venezuela on steroids, and that's what would have happened.
President, thank you. Are you saying that Secretary Hegseth and Rubio are going to be running Venezuela, and will you be sending in U.S. military troops to provide? They're going to be a team
that's working with the people of Venezuela to make sure that we have Venezuela right. Because for us to just leave, who's going to take over? I mean, there is nobody to take over. You have a vice president who's been appointed by Maduro. And right now she's the vice president, and she's, I guess, the president. She was sworn in as president just a little while ago. She had a long conversation with Marco, and she said, we'll do whatever you need. I think she was quite gracious, but she really doesn't have a choice. We're going to have this done right. We're not going to just do this with Maduro, then leave like everybody else, leave and say, let it go to hell. If we just left, it has zero chance of ever coming back. We'll run it properly. We'll run it professionally. We'll have the greatest oil companies in the world go in and invest billions and billions of dollars and take out money, use that money in Venezuela. And the biggest beneficiary are going to be the people of Venezuela. And also, I can't stress this strongly enough, the people that got thrown out of Venezuela that are now in the United States. And frankly, some want to stay and some probably want to go back. Yeah.
Protect Americans in the country, and were any of the detained Americans?
Well, right now they're very protected because nobody's going to mess with us. They're very protected. The people of, and we let them know that you better not touch one of them.
Are you concerned that bad elements of the Maduro regime will remain in place?
Well, we know who they are. We're on them, and they're acting much differently now than they would have acted 2 days ago. Okay, wait, behind you, please.
Mr. President, why is running a country in South America America first?
Well, I think it is because we want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world. And we want to make sure we can protect it. Yes, sir. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, is there a message here for Cuba and Diaz-Canel?
Well, Cuba is an interesting case. Cuba is, not doing very well right now. That system has not been a very good one for Cuba. The people there have suffered for many, many years. And I think Cuba is going to be something we'll end up talking about because Cuba is a failing nation right now, very badly failing nation. And we want to help the people. It's very similar in the sense that we want to help the people in Cuba, but we want to also help the people that were forced out of Cuba and living in this country. Do you want to say something about that, Marco, please?
Well, I mean, I just gave you a statement a few minutes ago about, when the president speaks, you should take him seriously. Suffice it to say, Cuba is a disaster. It's run by incompetent, senile men, and in some cases, not senile, but incompetent nonetheless. It has no economy. It's in total collapse. And by the way, they were, all of the guards that helped protect Maduro, this is well known, their whole spy agency, all that were full of Cubans. I mean, it's amazing. This poor island took over Venezuela in some cases. One of the biggest problems the Venezuelans have is they have to declare independence from Cuba. They tried to basically colonize it from a security standpoint. So, yeah, look, if I lived in Havana and I was in the government, I'd be concerned, at least a little bit.
Cutting off the oil flow to Cuba from Venezuela?
Well, the president already announced a week ago that anything that's sanctioned, it's sanctioned oil, it's not going to be allowed to get there. So that's a pre-existing.
Mr. President.
The answer is yes. Yes.
Is the U.S. aware of the location of opposition leader Machado, and have you been in contact with her?
No, we haven't. No, we haven't.
Mr. President.
Do you have any hesitations about Machado?
Mr. President, on Monday.
Oh, I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect to be the leader.
Mr. President, is it possible that the U.S. ends up administrating Venezuela for years?
Well, it won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial. So it's not going to cost us anything. We will. Well, we want safety there. We want to be surrounded by countries that aren't housing all of our enemies all over the world. That's what was happening, and you don't want to have that. But we're going to be rebuilding, and we're not spending money. The oil companies are going to go in. They're going to spend money. We're going to take back the oil that, frankly, we should have taken back a long time ago. A lot of money is coming out of the ground. We're going to get reimbursed for all of that. We're going to get reimbursed for everything that we spend. So it's going to be a very important. This is a very big evening that took place last night. We have to be surrounded by safe, secure countries, and we also have to have energy. Very important. We have to have energy that's real energy, not where they're getting 4% and 5% of the energy out of the ground. You take a look. It was such a disaster. So what's going to happen with Venezuela, I think, over the next period of a year is going to be a great thing, and the people of Venezuela will be the biggest beneficiaries.
Mr. President,
going to send in the
U.S. military.
Mr. President, thank you. What did you last speak to Maduro about when you spoke? And is the
Well,
U.S.
I don't want to get
at war
into
with
the
Venezuela?
conversations, but I did have conversations with him, and I said, you got to surrender. And I actually thought he was pretty close to doing so, but now he wished he did, yeah.
You said that Maduro is responsible for drug trafficking. You recently pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was convicted on many drug trafficking. Can you explain how these two situations are different?
Well,
and would you ever pardon Maduro?
I endorsed, as you know, the winning president, the man who won in Honduras. I endorsed the man who won in Chile. I endorsed the man who won in Argentina. And we are doing very well with that whole group. What the man that I pardoned was, if you could equate it to us, he was treated like the Biden administration treated a man named Trump. That didn't work out too well for them. This was a man who was persecuted very unfairly. He was the head of the country. He was persecuted very unfairly. And there are a number of them. And we felt that it was a very unfair situation that happened to him. He's also a party member of the man who won. So obviously the people liked what I did. And one of the reasons that was done is because of the fact that the party in power felt very strongly that that man was treated very badly. I studied it very quickly, and then I studied it in great detail. I went to a lot of the people standing behind me, and they felt that that man was persecuted and treated very badly. That's why I gave him a pardon.
You referenced boots on the ground earlier. Can you just sort of button this up? Do you envision the U.S. military having a presence in Venezuela as the U.S. runs that country?
No, we're going to have a presence in Venezuela as it pertains to oil, because we have to have, we're sending our expertise in. So you may need something, not very much. But no, we're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground. And that wealth is going to the people of Venezuela and people from outside of Venezuela that used to be in Venezuela. And it goes also to the United States of America in the form of reimbursement for the damages caused us by that country. So I want to thank you all very much. Thank you. Do you have one? Yes, please. You were so nice before. I'm going to give you the final question. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Unless
President.
it's a bad question, in
It's
which
about
case I'll
Putin.
go one word. It's about who?
It's about Putin, if you want.
About Putin. Well, that's
Okay.
always nice
You had
to
a
talk
phone-
about Putin.
You had a phone call with him
Yeah.
on Monday. Did he talk at all about Maduro? Did y'all talk about this?
No, we didn't.
And
We
then-
never spoke about Maduro.
Are you mad at him right now? I mean, there's this
I'm not
intelligence.
thrilled with Putin. I'm not thrilled with Putin. He's killing too many people. I thought that would be so. I settled 8 1/4 war. You know what the 1/4 was? Thailand and Cambodia. I did it again. They broke out, and I did it in about 5 hours, and I settled it. I'm giving myself 1/4, so I'm up to now 8 1/4. In other words, I settled the war, but then they broke out. They had a pretty bad breakout over the last 4 days. I got them to go back to peace. So I only give 1/4. I thought the easiest one would be, one of the easier ones would be Russia, Ukraine. It's not. And they both have done some pretty bad things. And look, that's Biden's war. That's not my war. But I want to stop the lives. Did you see where last month, 30,000, it was 27,000 the month before. 30,000, mostly soldiers, were killed this last month. 30,000. I want to stop that. You know, I got NATO to pay 5% instead of the 2% that they weren't paying. They weren't paying 2, now they pay 5. And we send them a lot of munitions. We send them a lot of things, missiles and various other things, a lot. And they pay. The United States is not losing money. We're probably making money on that. It's the last thing I care about. I just want to stop all those people. We're losing 25, 30,000 human beings that come from 2 places that are very far away. But if I can stop, because it's something I've been pretty good at doing, deals, I guess. It's all a deal. Life is a big deal. But if I can stop that war and stop 30,000 young people, in addition to the fact that people are being killed in Kiev, people are being killed in other cities throughout, a much smaller number, but they're being killed, viciously killed. So I'm not happy about it. I thought that would be something that would get solved. We have Mr. Witkoff here. I think that we're making progress, but that's a war that should have never happened. If I were president, it would have never happened. Putin says it. Everybody says it. If I were president, that would have never happened. But I inherited that war. That was Joe Biden, Zelensky, and Putin. I came into the situation, and it's a mess. And I will say this. I watched an operation last night that was so precise, that was so brilliant. I mean, it was incredible. If we had our people, like this general, and our people involved, that war would not have gone on very long, that I can tell you. That war, to use an old term, that war has become a bloodbath, and we want it to get stopped. Thank you very much.
There we have it there. President Trump leaving the press conference at Mar-a-Lago. So we've just been hearing from the president as well as General Kane, Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth. Firstly, I want to thank our guests Daniela Mello and Diogo Castro Silva. Still with us, our Washington correspondent, Ubi Shabandar. Now, Ubi, I would like to come with you as we heard members of the media there press Trump on exactly how he'd run Venezuela. He said he's not afraid of boots on the ground, but what did you take from that press conference?
Well, President Trump seemed to have 2 main messages. One, to the Venezuelan people. In the words of the American president, the Venezuelan people will now have peace and safety and justice, and we'll have a chance to have a real country. The American president continues saying that the oil infrastructure in Venezuela, which has been badly damaged, fallen into disrepair over years of neglect, will now be rebuilt with American oil companies investing their own money to go into Venezuela and to rehabilitate and expand and improve Venezuela's ability to extract oil from the ground. That money will go to be reinvested in Venezuela, according to President Trump, and it will also, according to the American president, go to reimburse American companies and oil companies who have had their assets nationalized and taken over by the former Venezuelan government. So I think that is very significant. The American president also, in his address to the American nation, said that the United States must ensure dominance, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere. Venezuela has a number of migrants that live in the United States. The president said that many of those Venezuelan migrants will now want to go back to a Venezuela that will be properly run. Also, a stark warning to the president of Colombia, President Petro, with President Trump saying that he better watch his rear end. He didn't say rear end, he said another word. A warning to the Colombian president by both the American president and the Secretary of State, which the Trump administration believes that the Colombian authorities are fully aware of the cocaine and drug manufacturing in that country that then is shipped into the United States. So the American president also used this opportunity in the special operations force that was able to successfully capture Maduro with no significant casualties. The American president using this opportunity to send a warning to other countries in Latin America, as well as a warning by the Trump administration to Iran.
Now let's get into that. As you mentioned, Trump said he would be willing to carry out operations like this elsewhere and send out that warning to other foreign leaders. How do you think that will be going down in Tehran at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, this military operation was extremely complex. So we'll break it down for our viewers. This involved Delta Force and what's also known as the Night Stalkers, the Special Operations Aviation Regiment, that had to traverse hundreds of miles from the Caribbean, not only into Venezuela, but into a very densely populated city, Caracas, and they had to have precise intelligence minute by minute on the movement of Maduro and his wife before Maduro was able to enter his safe zone, or the safe room, which would have had reinforced steel doors. So it seems that the American Special Forces operators and likely CIA operatives on the ground were able to have precise intelligence and were able to fly into Caracas that was heavily defended in the face of massive amounts of gunfire to successfully capture Maduro before he goes into his underground bunker and then ship him out of the country. It does seem that at least one American helicopter took significant damage, but U.S. authorities saying that no American soldiers, no American Delta Force operators, the Tier 1 Special Forces operators that operate in the dark under covert secrecy, none of them were killed. And President Trump, very significantly, did open the possibility of what he called a second wave of military operations. And he mentioned a number of times Operation Midnight Hammer, the American military operation flying those B-2 bombers all the way from Missouri to strike and decimate Iran's underground nuclear program. The U.S. president, in his address to the American people following this Special Forces operation in Venezuela, raised the issue of Iran in a number of instances, of course, with Iran facing a number of protests throughout the country. Essentially, Trump saying that, hey, we can do the Special Forces operation again elsewhere. We have the capability, we have the intelligence and the expertise. So, and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, reminding the world that when this president warns you, he means it.
Our Washington correspondent there, Ubi Shabandar. Thank you, Ubi, for your analysis across that press conference. And of course, we'll keep bringing you the latest developments on that story as they come. To other news now, and 2 Russian missiles struck a 5-story residential building in Kharkiv, injuring at least 31 people. Kharkiv's mayor said the building suffered serious damage, while the regional governor said it was completely destroyed. Of the injured, 5 are in moderate condition and 1 is in a serious condition. The attack also damaged a shopping centre and a hospital and hit power and heating networks. Trolleybus and tram services have been temporarily suspended. Emergency services are continuing search and rescue operations and tackling fires, while nearby building facades have also been damaged. Finland is investigating a possible sabotage of an undersea cable in the Gulf of Finland. Authorities have detained several crew members of the cargo ship Fitberg. The case raises concerns about Europe's critical infrastructure as engineers check the damage between Helsinki and Tallinn. Our Europe correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Finland reports progress in the suspected sabotage investigation of a key undersea telecommunications cable in the Gulf of Finland. On December 31st, Finnish police seized the cargo ship Fitberg after its anchor was found dragging on the seabed in Finnish waters, likely damaging the subsea link that connects Helsinki with Tallinn. Estonian officials are also part of the investigation, in which 2 of the 14 detained crew members were arrested and 2 more denied travel, as police question them on possible aggravated damage and interference with telecommunications. The cable remains out of service as engineers assess the full impact. In his New Year's address, Finland's president said Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine has changed ties permanently and stressed that while Russia remains Finland's neighbor, future relations will depend on Moscow's actions and respect for international norms. Alexander Stubb also reiterated that Finland and its allies continue to support Ukraine's sovereignty, saying peace is closer now than at many points in the conflict, but there's no certainty Russia is ready for peace. The suspected sabotage case underscores growing concerns about critical infrastructure vulnerabilities in Europe's northern flank. Undersea cables carry vast amounts of data, and damage to them has implications for communications, financial networks, and national security. In response to previous incidents, NATO and the EU boosted efforts to protect undersea infrastructure. NATO created a dedicated coordination cell for critical subsea assets and increased naval, aerial, and satellite surveillance in key sea lanes. The EU expanded its critical infrastructure resilience framework to include submarine cables and pipelines. Together, they are improving early warning systems, sharing intelligence, funding monitoring technology, and strengthening rapid repair capacity, treating undersea networks as a core security concern in the face of rising hybrid threats. Stubb will attend a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing next Tuesday in Paris. Discussions will include support for Ukraine and next steps in peace talks. This, as Nordic and Baltic states push to tighten coordination on critical infrastructure protection, deterrence, and relations with Russia. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Yemen's Southern Separatist Movement said on Friday it plans to hold a referendum on independence from the north within 2 years. The move has increased tensions among Gulf states. The government tried to take back Hadramaut from the foreign-backed Southern Transitional Council, which seized much of southern and eastern Yemen in December. This caused tensions between Saudi Arabia and the UAE and weakened the coalition against the Houthis. On Friday, the Hadramaut governor said a peaceful operation had begun to regain control. Switzerland is in mourning after one of the deadliest fires in its recent history, as investigators work to determine how a New Year's Eve celebration in the alpine resort of Crans-Montana turned into a deadly inferno, questions are mounting over fire safety and emergency access inside the venue. Survivors have begun speaking publicly, describing moments of chaos.
Fire officials in Crans-Montana, Switzerland, have confirmed that the New Year's Eve blaze at the Le Constellation Bar has killed 40 people and injured 119 others, many suffering severe burns. Investigators are focusing on the possibility that fountain candles attached to champagne bottles held too close to the venue's low ceiling during celebrations, ignited flammable materials and caused the fire to spread rapidly.
Dans le cas présent, l'Office cantonal du feu.
Valais State Councillor Stéphane Ganza said the cantonal fire service had never received reports of defects or safety violations at the building and confirmed that the bar was equipped with an emergency exit.
This building was equipped with an emergency exit. There was not just one door, even though at the time of the fire it appears most people left through the main entrance.
Swiss prosecutors say the investigation is continuing into whether the use of fountain candles was appropriate in an enclosed space.
As for fountain candles or Bengal lights, these are products that can be purchased in shops and are widely accessible. Whether or not they can be used in enclosed or confined spaces is part of the ongoing investigation, and conclusions will be drawn.
A survivor of the blaze, Axel, described scenes of panic inside the venue as the fire broke out in the basement.
Miraculously, I managed to get out. I was in the basement right where it started. I had to overturn a table and hide behind it because the flames were coming down. People were trying to go upstairs. There was a huge crowd, and I thought I would be burned if I tried to push through. I waited, then ran. We couldn't see anything. I smashed a table against the window, but it was plexiglass, so I kicked it until it collapsed.
Swiss authorities have ruled out terrorism and are now examining fire safety compliance, exit access, and whether criminal charges, including negligent homicide, could follow.
Now, let's take a look at the major stories from the region. Protests continued across several cities in Iran on Friday. Earlier this week, clashes with police left at least 7 people dead. Demonstrators are protesting the rial's collapse against the US dollar and the rising cost of living. The protests started with Tehran shopkeepers over economic hardship and have spread nationwide with political demands. President Masoud Pezeshkian called for unity and blamed Tehran's enemies for the economic problems. Despite government promises of reforms, the protests continue. Well, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has condemned remarks by President Trump as reckless and dangerous, adding that Iran's armed forces are on standby. In a post on X, Araghchi said Iranians affected by recent currency volatility have the right to protest peacefully, but noted isolated incidents of violence, including attacks on police and the use of Molotov cocktails. Araghchi warned that Iranians would reject any foreign interference and said the country's armed forces are ready to respond to violations of its sovereignty. Trump had earlier claimed that if Iran violently suppresses peaceful protesters, the United States would intervene. Heavy snowfall has brought life in eastern Turkey to a standstill. Roads to hundreds of villages and rural communities were closed on Friday as authorities battled the snow. Heavy snowfall has left town centres and surrounding villages buried under thick layers of snow. Hundreds of roads have been affected as snow ploughs and municipal teams have been working around the clock to keep main roads and village lanes open as communities try to get back on their feet. And finally, in Turkey's Trabzon province, the ancient Sümele Monastery has been transformed into a breathtaking winter spectacle after that recent snowfall, highlighting the dramatic beauty of the historic site, perched high above the Altındere Valley.
The ancient Sümele Monastery in Turkey's northern Trabzon province has been transformed into a striking winter scene following recent snowfall, as harsh winter conditions continue to affect much of the country. Dating back to the 4th century and also known as the Monastery of the Virgin Mary, Sümele perches 300 meters above the Altındere Valley on steep cliffs. Drone footage has captured the snow-covered monument, carved directly into the rock face of Mount Karadag, showcasing its dramatic setting. The monastery, listed on UNESCO's tentative World Heritage List, has undergone extensive restoration in recent years. After an 88-year hiatus, it was reopened for religious practice in August 2010. Located in Trabzon's Matska district, Sumela Monastery remains a popular destination for both domestic and international tourists year-round. Its wintertime snow cover, however, adds a particularly striking dimension to this unique historical landmark.
Well, you're up to date with world news. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.